Welcome everyone to the Something Wicked Film Festival DocuFest panels. This is our last panel for today. We are talking about making documentary films. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the people who will be watching this and talk about what film you're representing.
I'm Diogo Varela. I'm from Portugal. I'm the director of Zé Pedro Rock and Roll. It's a documentary on a very famous Portuguese rock star that passed away 3 years ago. Hope you like it. And it's a pleasure to be here talking to you about the magic of doing documentary films.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So documentaries are very, there are such a wide array of documentaries. We have documentaries like your documentary, which is about people. We see documentaries about people alive and people who have passed on. We see documentaries about nature. We see documentaries about behind the scenes. So as a filmmaker, when you are doing documentaries, how do you go about deciding what subject to talk about? So like with Zé Pedro, you're talking about a passed away Portuguese rock and roll person. What kind of made you decide to go on a subject like that, and any other documentaries you've thought about doing and have done?
Well, in the case of Zé Pedro, it was easy for me because we were very close friends, and so I felt that the urge, that need to document the importance that he had on the Portuguese rock scene, and actually on the Portuguese music scene, because when they start being famous, it was like late 70s, beginning of the 80s. So they were a very important band on the process of having new bands singing rock and roll, but in Portuguese, which was something strange for us. We were just fresh out of a dictatorship. We had a fascist regime for a long time. So it was a late bloom for us, the rock and roll and all that stuff, and they were very important in that area. So I felt the urge of living for my kids to understand the importance that he had and the role that he played on that part of the Portuguese culture.
So how much would you say as a filmmaker, when you're doing a documentary, a subject matters to your project?
Well, a lot. So far, I only did documentaries about people, about characters, and that's what motivated me. And I've done different people. Like I've been in Buenos Aires, Argentina, doing a documentary on a poet, a tango poet. I've done documentaries on fado, and this one is rock and roll. Fado is like the Portuguese folk song. But mainly what awakens the need to do the documentary is it's the characters that I'm portraying. It's how important they are, or they were somehow to me and to my culture.
With choosing the people, the subjects you want to talk to, obviously a lot with that too. After it deals with the people you interview to talk about your certain subject. So it's hard to find people sometimes when you're doing these subjects. So how is it for you as a filmmaker when you talked about Zé Pedro, and for your other documentaries, when it's like, okay, I know I want to talk about the subject, but now it comes into making the story, showing people their story, and choosing the people that talk about their story?
For me, it has a lot to do, and like 80% of the film, it's on the preparation you do, on the studying the subjects, the research you do, a lot of research, a lot of hours, a lot of months, and sometimes years preparing the film, preparing the documentary. I think that's the main job. That's the artist part of the job. Filming and shooting, I think it's the easiest thing to do, actually. And then the editing, where everything comes alive. Because I consider that the main difference between shooting documentary or shooting fiction is that in documentary, there's almost a freedom breed that you have, that you can almost go with the flow. You don't really go with the flow, but sometimes it feels like you can, because sometimes the subject gives you something that you weren't expecting, and you can count on that. And in fiction, not really. It's everything. It's script, and I know that some documentary directors, they work with scripts also. I never did in my films. What I do is I really do a lot of research. I know what I want. I know what I want to get out of the subjects, but I'm also open to what I can catch when I'm shooting, when I'm filming. And that's the beauty of it, right? It's never closed. You really only close it in the editing room. With fiction, not so much.
Actually, in another panel, we talked about that. Talked about the fiction on nonfiction type deals. So, because that's the big deal with documentary, like you said before, is all the research. So, how is it doing the research? You're like, again, trying to figure out the people you want to talk to, the locales you want to film, and how much of that is so like, how much of that process does that feel for you, and how much you like it and don't like it?
Oh, I love it, because it's like you get closed in that people's life, and I'm always focused when I'm doing the research, and it's a hard work, because like you have to see thousands of pictures, thousands of hours, sometimes in like researching the images, the films that were made, reading about it, and at some time it puts you there. Your mind is there, and you really get to understand the subject you're filming, and I love that process. That's it's the hardest one, but it's at the same time it's the one that gives me more joy as an author, as a director.
So one of the biggest differences talking about like fiction and nonfiction is interviews, because when you're choosing to talk to people, it's not like a nonfiction, it's not like a fiction where you have a script they go by. With nonfiction, you are sitting down, you are talking to people. So how is it as a filmmaker, you deal with that when you find the people you want to interview, and you're talking about, depending on the subject, something that might be touchy for them or something that they're very passionate about? And how, as a director, how do you go about feeling out the process when you're interviewing these people?
It depends. Sometimes I try to put myself in their shoes, but I would say the big majority of the time, I don't want to be in those shoes. I want to create some discomfort. Is that the word? I'm sorry, my English is a bit rusty.
No, discomfort.
Forgive me. One thing that I'm editing my new film now, and one thing that I've noticed, and say Pedro helped me on that, on the process of making that film, is that more and more I tend not to use interviews. Mm-hmm. The format of the talking heads, it's annoying me more and more. I prefer to try to create different languages, different approaches that I don't have to have a talking head talking to the camera. In this new film I'm preparing, I'm using conversations that the subjects have between them, and the camera is more outside. I'm outside of the conflict or of the
drama. So similar like in Pedro, when you have the women sitting looking at the pictures, at all the little childhood pictures. So it's kind of like that, where it's like not a one-on-one interview, but more of like
that's what I prefer. Yeah,
were a fly on the wall of a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's like it definitely does feel personal, more personal than a one-on-one interview with that and stuff. So also the other half of documentaries is we talk to people, but it's also filming locale, filming, getting stuff. So how do you go about when going, okay, I know the subject, I know the area, but deciding, oh well, why don't I film? Like sometimes you see documentaries where they follow the person that they're going to talk to, or you see like Zé Pedro, we see Portuguese and stuff. What kind of, as a filmmaker, you decide about wanting to make more than just people talking and then people talking and people talking?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I didn't quite hear you.
So I was saying, for filming locations, and when you were not talking to people as a filmmaker, how do you go about deciding that what to put in to kind of expand the world, other than when you're talking about your subject?
Yeah, well, actually, everything has to do with the subject. Even if I'm filming a small street, that street has to do something with the subject or with the story that I want to tell with that subject. The thing is, like, if I had the budgets that Wiseman has to shoot his documentaries, when he spends like a year shooting or 8 months shooting, it's easier. But when I'm always dealing with very short budgets for the films, so you really have to make it happen instead of waiting for things to happen, which sometimes it's like, sometimes it works well, sometimes it's like, it feels to me that I'm forcing too much.
Yeah.
And then I have to go back and rethink and have a different approach to it.
I gotcha. And with documentaries and talking about approaches and stuff, depending on the subject you're talking about too, there's some things that, legality you have to deal with. So for example, with Zé Pedro, you're talking about a band and you obviously want to play some music, and everyone knows that, like, if you want to use this, you have to do that, and you have to deal with that.
And I have a lot of music in that film.
It's
expensive.
How was that? How is that process as a documentary when you're talking about certain subjects, and then having to again deal with, like, I want to talk about this band, I want to use some of the music, and then even though you were close to them, dealing with the legal side of, like, I want to use these songs to help deal with the story of the band itself?
It's not easy. And I'm a director and a producer, so I'm my own producer, which in one point it's a lot of work in my shoulders, and I really prefer not to produce when I'm directing. But with the budgets that I have, it's impossible. I have to be there, and I have to make sure that I can have the music I want. In this case, in Zé Pedro's case, with a price that I can pay for. And that means that you have to deal with every single one of them independently. I'm lucky enough, because I think that here in Portugal, some people already know my films, and then they know what I do, and they know where I come from low budgets, but they've been helpful enough to make prices to give me some prices that are not their normal prices. So, but that makes me be there, and being the one that has to deal with them on a one-to-one basis to make sure that to guarantee that I can have those prices. So. But yeah, when you think of that, you have to think that costs money, and and it's always adding. And
the other side of the coin too is not even music, but also like what I like about San Pedro too is you have the shots of, again, you know, back then you were able to get footage from Portuguese back then during the dictatorship and stuff. And so how was that going about procuring like really old, like procuring the film for it? And it's very, again, like finding the people that's like, hey, I would like this. Like sometimes it's easier to, you know, it's easier when you have the childhood videos, but finding stuff that's more worldly. How is that process?
Well, it's amazing. It's very lonely because you spend a lot of times, a lot of hours in a small cubic, like very dark, with the monitor in front of you and seeing hours and hours and hours and hours of footage to choose what you want to use. What I normally do is before I go to that phase, I have a lot of research and I have a lot of ideas that I want to follow because I already know the story that I want to tell. So I look for those images that are going to help me to tell my story. So when I start doing the research of footage, I already know what I want to find, which kind of helps. But it's always a lonely process and lots and lots and lots of hours researching and writing and researching and writing. It's like, yeah, it gets you some gray hair, for sure.
How often have you had a situation where you're doing this, then someone says, oh, I've got this photo here. You're like, wait, can I use that? Or I got this video and you're like, wait, I can use that. Like surprise thing that someone reveals.
Sometimes
like, oh,
it happens. Sometimes it happens. Well, with San Pedro, there was a Super 8 film of him when he was a kid, and everybody thought that was lost forever, and because it was in a very bad shape. It was inside of a paper box that was all moisty and humidity, and so recovering that and bringing that back to life and getting it in a digital format that I could use, it was a great surprise for me. It was like, even for the family itself, for the sisters of San Pedro, and to find out that they had that image back. It's something that they knew, that they saw it when they were kids, and they thought that, oh, we lost that forever. No, I recovered for the film, and that's, yeah, of course, it gets you hype when you find something like that. Yeah.
So speaking of technology and stuff too, about, you know, making documentaries, technology has changed in like the last 20 years. So like what talking about with that's something that, you know, 20 years earlier you wouldn't have been able to do that, but now stuff like that we're seeing. So how has technology made filmmaking for you easier or potentially harder than it was 10 years ago?
Well, for me, it's for sure it's easier because it's the only possible way for me to go and to shoot a feature film with a small team and a small crew. That would be impossible if we didn't add all this technology that we have now. So it would be completely impossible for me to shoot a feature film with the budget I had if it wasn't for the technology. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. So, and with technology, kind of going back again, with any documentaries are like any other film, budget, and as you keep alluding to, you've had to deal with small budgets. So everyone sees how with fiction, low budgets, how it is, how, you know, there's a look to it. How is it dealing with a low budget documentary compared to?
It's crazy. Look, the film that, for instance, the film that I did in Buenos Aires, we had to rent an apartment, and the small crew that we had was living and cooking in that apartment and getting out to shoot, and it was like it was madness. What I had to do to make sure that I did that film. you have to compromise a lot. You have to make sacrifices a lot with a small budget film. But mainly, what my intent is always try to think about the film and put the film first. So if I have to share an apartment with the rest of the crew, I'll do it. But just as long as I can tell the story I want to tell.
And all of that again comes down to passion and like love for what we do. So talking about that, for filmmaking and particularly documentary, what was your inspiration? What kind of made you want to get into documentary? What was some maybe directors that you looked up to, or what was a documentary that kind of was influential to you deciding that I want to make documentaries yourself?
I think there's a lot of documentary directors that like from Wiseman that we were talking about until like somebody like Kowalski, for example. It's like completely different worlds, but they're both great. And the thing about documentary, it was mainly that I could do a film with a small crew, and that I could have the freedom, the liberty to do it the way I want to do it on my time, and you can't do that on fiction. You don't have that freedom of movement and that documentary gives you. So that's why I started doing documentaries. As a producer, I produced feature films. Well, I have a feature film that hopefully will be ready this year. But I really like to do documentaries. I'm more focused to that because of the freedom, that ability of moving on your own time and because it's really different. It's a different language. It's a completely different language, and it's not so strict. You know, it's not so format as it is in doing fiction.
Well, the other half of filming is, like you alluded to, editing. So how is editing? Because editing is also a big thing because, you know, when you're making
where it comes to life. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're doing fiction, like you have a script, you have certain things, but nonfiction, there's so much. You may have an interview that goes on way too long and stuff that you may have to cut, or you may have, you know, oh, why don't we do this? Or you think of, and like you said, so free-forming of, you can film so much. So how is editing so much a process for you as a director, as a producer, as a filmmaker?
It's where everything comes alive. So it's really I never edit my films. I did a little bit in the beginning, but I like to see. For me, it's very important to have like a very good editor working with me and getting his input also. So that because I've prepared the film, I shot the film, and I'm so much, my presence, it's there so much, and I have everything so much in my head that sometimes it doesn't give you the clear view of the changes that you have to do. And sometimes it's not easy for you. It's like cutting a arm. You're not going to cut your arm, but the guy next to you, he might do that. You know, so it's very important. And and the new meanings that a editor can bring to something that in the first look you missed, and so it's very important. It's very important. More and more from one film to the other, I start to understand that the most time I had to edit a film, the better it would come out. So the more time you spend editing and thinking and pausing and thinking of it and seeing it and talk about it and rest and then go back to it. The more you do that, the better it comes out. For my experience, so
Yeah.
it's a very important step.
And with that, like your main goal at the end of the day is for documentaries is again saying a message and all of that. So when you're making these documentaries, what is your what in your mind is like the end result of like with like for example as Pedro, is it saying a message, making sure like people know who he was and people learning, or is it a message in your documentaries that you want people to know? Or for you, like what is your end goal when you're done with your documentaries that you want people to get a takeaway from it?
So, in the case of Zé Pedro, what I wanted is to people to understand why he became what he became, where did he came from, what was his motive to become a musician and a rock star, and why everybody liked him. Like he's one of the most loved musician in Portugal. Everybody likes him because of that, of where he came from, and because of that idea that he had a lot of fans, but he was a fan himself. He had his he had his idols also, and he assumed that, which is very difficult for you to see in somebody very famous. They normally don't have idols,
Yeah.
or you never know about them, right? And Zé Pedro had it. So that was my main goal, to so that people could understand where he came from, and the reason behind him being what he was.
Awesome. We're gonna wrap this up a little bit. Before that, is there any fun stories that you would like to talk about that from Zé Pedro, or maybe some of your other documentaries that you have done that you can think of?
So many, I don't know. Well, from Zé Pedro, I have that the only sad part about it is that I talked to Zé Pedro about doing this film, and we always said, "Oh, we'll do it one day," and we kept postponing it. I had my work, I had my films, he had his music, and we always thought that we would do this one day. And unfortunately, the day never came. He died too soon. That's the sorrow I had. But I had some, like when I was in Argentina filming with Horacio Ferrer, the poet that did all the poems for Piazzolla. I'd never seen a poet being famous, like people recognizing him on the street and asking for autographs. And that happened to him, and I was shocked. And we were inside a cab going to the location, and I was in a cab with him. And the cab driver understood that we were making a documentary with him, and he stopped the car and turned back to me. "You might have noticed, but you're going to be filming a living legend." And I was like, "What? Even the cab driver knows the guy?" I was like, that was amazing for me, because I never thought that a poet could be that famous, only in a place like Buenos Aires.
Oh yeah. Well, I want to go a little bit of what you were saying with Zé Pedro, because the fact that you wanted to do it when I was live, and then unfortunately you passed away before you can do it. How is that going on the subject of talking, the difference between you're talking to a live celebrity versus when you're talking about someone that has passed away? How is that when you're doing that subject of, because there's this two, like this, you want to talk about the person, but there is a different line there. How is that as a filmmaker when you talk about someone who has passed away, you can't directly talk to, and then someone who is still alive?
Yeah, well, it's completely different. It's completely different. Because in one, you have the character that can give you his point of view, and with the other, when they're dead, you can only imagine what his point of view would be. So it's always your approach and your view as a director that you're going to work on it. It's never you never know if it's really what you would think of, or if it's really what you would say in that occasion. You assume it was because he said that somewhere in an interview, or you read that somewhere in a book or something like that. But you never know, right? So yeah. I think it's easier to do a film when people are living and they're there to correct you if you're going on the wrong direction or not.
When you're dealing with someone living, how much like input do they have on your documentary process? How much do you consult them about, like, hey, I'm going to talk to this person, or we're going to do this when you're covering someone who's alive?
No, I always avoid, and I never show my films before the opening night, even to the subjects that I'm filming, because I want to have that freedom. If they see and if they don't like anything, they'll ask to change, or I always want to keep my view of the subject, or make sure that the story I want to tell is the story that I'm going to tell. So I always avoid showing the film, and I try not, because sometimes I had that with the film I did on a fado singer, very famous here in Portugal, of course, Beatriz da Conceição. She was a very famous fado singer. And she was always trying to get me to interview some people for the film, and I was always running from that, because that wasn't what I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell exactly what I did, the loneliness that she had, and because at the end she had a very lonely life, and besides being famous, she, like almost a lot of famous people that we know, they're very famous, but they're very isolated in their small world inside a big world. It's like, so I always try to run away from that. I do my research. It all goes back to research. You do your research, and then you don't need their input for that.
So when you're talking about a subject and you talk to the person about it, and because again it's your vision, how is that process with someone? Do they ever approach you, say, hey, like, so Pedro, you said how you guys have talked about it, but some of these other documentaries, how is it when it's like, are you approaching them saying, hey, I like to do a documentary, but I have a vision that I want to keep to, or have anyone's approached you saying, hey, I would like you to do a documentary, and then you go, okay, but I'm going to do it my way?
No, it's no, it's always, it has to come from me. Otherwise, it's like if I was booking to do weddings and funerals or whatever, and it's like, no, I do what I want to do, and I film the subjects I want to film, and I approach them, and they have to trust me, and they did. All of them did. Because they know that I'm passionate about it, and when we talk, they know that I know what I'm talking about. I research on them, and it's not like, oh, I'd like to do a film on you. What's your life like? That would not work, right? So,
Yeah.
well, I was lucky enough so far that I had all the freedom in the world from the subjects I filmed to do. And with Zé Pedro wasn't alive, but his band is still here, his family also, and all of them helped me a lot with the film and gave me total freedom to do whatever I wanted to do, and total access to all the footage and photos and everything that they had, all the archives they had. So that helped me a lot. I thought it wouldn't be possible to do the film I did if I didn't add all that freedom and all that help from everybody, and the access to all the archives that in the way I did.
And how's the receptive at at the end of it when you are at opening night and they see it for the first time, and how when you're for Pedro, for example, someone who's seen the family member seeing, you know, their family member getting memorialized, and then living people seeing their story told to people.
Now, I was lucky because it really played very well. It worked very well. The film opened at the opening night of the Art Beat section in Doc Lisboa, which is like the biggest documentary festival in Portugal, and I think one of the good ones in Europe. And it won the public award in that the auditorium. It was like one of the biggest theaters that we have in Lisbon, and it was sold out. Unfortunately, I wasn't there. I was in the States working, but my wife was like with a cell phone filming, and we were WhatsApping and seeing but I had the feedback of the family, and they all thanked me for doing the film, and they're all happy. And we're almost family, and we have a very good relationship. I always keep them posted on how the film is doing and the festivals is going and the prizes that won and all that, and they're very happy about it. And I'm happy that they're happy about it because because of that, because I was a very, very, very good friend of Pedro, and for me it's important to know that the family and his widow and the rest of the band feel comfortable and like the film and like the result. Of course, it was very important for me in this case. Normally, I have to tell you, I don't really care if the subject likes the film as long as I do. It's a very selfish thing to say, I know, but
hey, that's what you got to do sometimes.
But I don't do films to. Normally, when I do a film, is because there's something that is about someone that I want to tell the story, and I think they're important enough for me to tell a story about them. So I think they're always safe.
Yeah. So we'll finish it off with one last question. And as you know, as an experienced documentary yourself, is there any advice you would give to people who are watching that want to make a documentary and don't know about some of the ins or outs, or is this something you would also say to your younger self, first starting out with documentaries, some piece of advice?
I think I always go back to the pre-production, and because it's what makes the difference. You really have to prepare. You have to prepare what you're doing, and prepare it very well. Like spend a lot of time in the archives, spend a lot of time thinking on what you're going to do, what you want to do, how you want to do it, plan it, study, plan it, prepare. That's, for me, that's the one of the most important things. Of course, have the free spirit of being open to improves, to what comes along, what the subjects give you, what happens. And in this documentary that I'm preparing right now, I have a scene in the film that wasn't supposed to be there. It was somebody, I was shooting in an old neighborhood in Lisbon, and an old guy came and started talking to the camera. And it seemed almost out of the blue, but I didn't cut it. And I kept shooting, and we kept recording the sound, and that was so amazing that I kept it. It's like, if I was blocked and only preoccupied with what I prepared, I would say, cut it, get out of here, I'm shooting something, and I would lost that. So you have to be open to what comes.
Well, I think that's
improve.
That's a good point to end on. So we're gonna go ahead and close it here. Diogo, thank you for coming, and go ahead and once again
Thank you.
tell people watching about what you submitted here, and if there's any other projects you want to tell the viewers and stuff, go ahead.
Well, have a good festival. Enjoy your festival. There's plenty of films and good films to see. Well, and you guys can look me up on Google if you want to see my films. I think you'll discover some of them there. It was a pleasure talking to you, and see you soon. Hopefully.
Yep. And thank you again for being so, Pedro. I actually greatly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
So hopefully you can enjoy the festival, and everyone watching, thank you again for watching, and enjoy the festival the rest of this week.